Hey everyone, in this video I want to focus in on drum sampling or doubling or layering techniques. Specifically in this video we're going to do some drum sample replacement and doubling on the kick drum just to give it that nice punch that you might want in a rock or metal mix. So right now our kick in mic, it's got a fair amount of punch to it, but it's a little bit stuffy. Typically, multi-track drums without any effects added to them just kind of sound a little stuffy, and especially on the kick and snare, we really want these things to be out front, and one way to do that is to layer up a sample with the original recording. I am not a fan of completely replacing drum tracks. I'm more of a fan of sort of tucking a sample under the existing recording and still letting the original recording be there and be sort of the forefront, but then we use a sample to augment what's already there. So I'm going to go ahead and pull down the kick out mic because we're mainly just going to be using the kick in. We're mainly going to be hearing our kick in our drum mix. So there are a variety of plugins available for drum replacement. One in particular that's really helpful for quick and easy drum replacement is Drum Replacer from UVI. But I want to show you a way you can do this in Logic by building your own drum replacement sampler presets. And we're going to do this using a rather large drum sample library that I've included with this course if you have purchased the course. So inside of here, you'll see there's 3 different sizes of kick drum, 3 different sizes of snare, and 3 different kits of toms. Each one of these has 4 different tom sizes in it, tuned in different ways. And if you go into any of these kick or snare folders, you'll see that there are multiple different techniques and styles. So feel free to use these samples for your own mixes. And personally, I just find that making my own sample libraries is more interesting and more unique than just using whatever sample libraries are out there on the internet. Now, my drum samples are drum samples that I actually recorded and edited myself. But if you don't want to purchase the course in order to get those samples, I highly recommend DrumWorks. They have a great library of minimally processed acoustic drum samples. These are just raw samples for you to do whatever you want with them. And that's what all of my samples are too. They're minimally processed, so we can still mix them later and sort of shape and sculpt the tone in a way that we like and not, use a mix-ready sample that we really don't want to or can't change much. So since this is sort of like a hard rock, heavy metal track, I'm going to go under the 22-inch by 20-inch kick. And I'm going to go to the metal punch style here. And what you'll see is we have 21 samples, and they're organized by velocity or dynamic. So the ones toward the top of the list are going to be your harder hitting samples. The ones towards the bottom are going to be your softer samples. So again, the ones towards the top have a lot of front end attack to them. And what we're going to do is we're going to load these into Sampler. We're going to create velocity layers out of them, and then we're going to randomize them a bit as well. So you're never really getting the same sample played twice. So first up, we need to tap into Logic's drum sample replacement and doubling tool. So what you do is you select the track that you want to add samples to, and you press Control D. And what this is going to do is it's going to analyze the transients in that track. Let's go ahead and just make this track a little bit bigger here. And so you'll see we've got our original snare here, and then we've got a MIDI region with a bunch of notes in it. And what the drum replacement doubling tool is doing is it's sensing the transients in the original recording and creating a note for each of those transients. And it does a pretty damn good job too. So up at the top here, you're going to want to select what instrument it is. I'm going to select kick. You can choose whether you want to replace or double. Replacement just means it's going to mute the original track. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on doubling. And then you can adjust the threshold. I recommend going to an area where there's a lot of kicks, like something like here. And there's some other like sort of background kicks here that I think are just mistakes. So what I want to do is I want to use the threshold slider to make sure that every single transient is getting a sample or getting a MIDI note. So you pull this up, you'll see less. You pull it down, you'll see more. But I also don't want erroneous notes like here. There's a bunch of erroneous notes over here. So you don't want to set it all the way down because then you're going to have too many samples. So try to just get it where you just have one note per sample. And I think that's good. I think these two might be a mistake. But that's okay. We can always remove them. That's the magic of doing this with MIDI is you can go in, you can adjust the placement, the velocity of each of these notes that are created. And then what you can do is you can set the trigger note for each sample. We're going to go ahead and use the general MIDI note for kick drum, which is C1 or MIDI note 36. If you select auto and kick up here, it'll probably put it on C1 automatically. And then you can also add a timing offset if you know what that is, but I'll show you a way later where we can manually adjust this. That's just to make sure that the samples are sort of phase aligned with the original kicks. So then you just click OK. And then what you'll see here is, once again, we've got our MIDI region and our original kick. Let's solo those. So that's what the kick in plus track sounds like right now. Now Logic will actually use its own preset single drum sample libraries for this. There's a bunch of different ones you can select here. They're all pretty dated and, they might work for like simple stuff, but for this, we really want to use our own sample. So instead of using the stock Logic library, I'm going to actually remove sampler on this track, and then I'm going to re-add sampler on this track in stereo. All of these samples in this sample library are all in stereo, and they do have stereo information, so I do recommend using a stereo output for these. Now, one quick thing I want to mention, because we are about to dive into some sample programming in Sampler, and I know a lot of people get frustrated with Sampler. If you want to completely forego creating your own sampler instrument for drum replacement, instead of loading Sampler on your replacer track, just load up Drum Kit Designer and choose a kit that has the best sounding kick drum for your track, and you're done. Just choose a kit that has the best sounding kick drum for your track. All of those kits have alternating samples and velocity layers built into them. Another option might be to load up your favorite third-party drum instrument and use it as a replacer track. So this is the magic of MIDI-based drum replacement. You can swap out the kick for any instrument you want, whether it be custom like we're about to do or a pre-made kit. Okay, so if you want to dive a little bit deeper into maybe some more advanced topics in Sampler, keep watching. Okay, so we've just got a stock, blank sampler instrument in the modulation matrix. I'm going to turn off these two options. We don't need those. I'm going to go to details, and then we're going to make sure we're in polyphonic mode. I'm actually going to step up the polyphony a bit, even though it's probably not necessary. And then what you can also do is you can add a sample select random. And what that will do is it'll make sure that the sample that's selected is sort of selected at random within a certain range. So that gives you sort of like a simple alternating or round robin type of effect, but it's just randomized. You don't want to crank this all the way up because then the samples are just going to jump all over the place. But if you set this to like a lower value, like plus or minus 15, you may start on this sample, but then occasionally get this one or occasionally get this one. So that's the way we're going to handle that. That's going to give us a little bit of randomization when we map in these samples. So let's get rid of these. We don't need the modulators, but we do need the mapping and zone parameters. Actually, the zone we can do without. So really the mapping is the most important one here. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this little G, and this is going to let you create a sampler group. We're going to go up to group, new. We're just going to call this kicks. I like adding all of my samples into a group because if you just start by dragging and dropping everything in, it may automatically try to create multiple groups, which we don't want. So then we're going to click on the little Z button. This is your zone view. This is where you're going to see all of the samples loaded in. So let's go ahead and select all and just drag those in right here. You'll see that they all get imported in order. And if we go back to the keyboard, you're going to see that each one is on a different note. What we want is we want all of these to be on this note, on C1, but split up into different velocity ranges. And so what I'm going to do here, if you take 128, that's the maximum, range of MIDI values, divided by 21 samples, that means that the range for each sample, the velocity range for each sample, should roughly be like 6 if we're equally spreading them across the 0 to 127 velocity range. To make this simpler, I'm just going to do it in 5s. So this very top sample, that's the loudest, its highest velocity is 127. So I'm going to set this to 125. And then the next one down, I'll set to 120, and then 115, and then 110. 105. And again, I'm just double clicking and then typing in the velocity value. If for some reason you don't see this velocity range column here, you can go up to View, Visible Zone List Columns, and make sure that velocity range is shown. And then I'll just keep going. 90, 85, 80, 75, 70, 65, 60, 55, 50, 45, 40, 35, 30, and 25. Okay, so our low velocity range is on the 5s. So the high values need to be 1 lower than the sample above it. So the range of this second sample needs to be 120 to 124. So I'll set this to 124, set this to 119, we'll set this to 114, 104, excuse me, not 104, 109. This is 104, 99. And, if you use a third-party sampler for this, you're going to be able to do this a lot quicker. But the upside here is you're doing your own thing. You're building you're designing your own instrument for your drum sample replacement, which I find to be more unique and original than just, using the same samples and the same, sample replacement software that everyone else uses. And the good thing about this too is once you set this up once, you never really have to worry about it again because there's not going to be any need to do all this sample programming again. You can just save this as a preset and recall it anytime you like. Okay, so now if I go back to my keyboard, you'll see that each note, each zone has a specific velocity range. This bottom one here, we're just going to drag that all the way down. So vertically is velocity, left and right, horizontally is pitch. Now we need to get all of these samples all on C1. So what we're going to do is go back to zone view, select all of these. We're going to set the key range starting on C1 and then just hit return. All of them will change to C1. Double click on the high key range, set that to C1, hit return. And then you can do the same thing for the key pitch, although that's not going to matter because we're going to go over to this playback column and we're going to turn pitch off. But we do want one shot on. And what one shot means is that each sample is going to play from beginning to end, regardless of how long the MIDI note is. So that makes sure that we're going to get kick hits where the tail of each sample doesn't get cut off. And there are some other options in here that we don't really need to play around with. But if we go back to keyboard view, we can now see that we have all 21 of those samples stacked up on C1, all in different velocity ranges. And then when we go back to synth view and go to details, once again, those samples are going to be selected at random within their specific velocity range. Okay, so let's see what this sounds like. Okay, so some of the samples sound a little too soft, others are just right, and that's just because Logic is pretty liberal with its velocity ranges when you use the drum replacement doubling tool. So one thing I recommend doing, and it's going to depend on the genre, some songs you may need to go through and manually adjust the velocity of each note. If I need this note to be louder and more punchy, I can pull it up. It's going to pick one of those samples from the top of the list. If I put this more toward the bottom, we're going to get a sample more toward the bottom of the list. So a softer velocity. That's one of the things I love about doing MIDI-based drum replacement like this, because it gives me like full control over all of the parameters. Even if I want to swap out a different sample, I can swap out a different sample. Or if you want to use a third-party drum instrument, or you want to use Drum Kit Designer or something that's in Logic, you can do that. You just have to swap out the instrument over here. Now, one thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to select all of these notes here, all of these kick hits. I'm going to go to Functions. I'm going to go to MIDI Transform, And then I'm going to go down to exponential velocity. This is going to bring up the MIDI transform window. This essentially allows you to batch process MIDI data. And so what I want to do is I want to create more of a logarithmic curve for the velocities. I want the lower velocities to kind of come up a bit, but I still want the velocities to be different because I want that variation in the drum replacer track. So what I'm going to do is pull down this option right here and create more of a logarithmic curve, maybe something like that, like -3. And with all of those notes selected, I can click operate only, and you'll see all of the softer velocities come up quite a bit. And if I want to do it even more than that, maybe I want like mostly harder hits with only a few softer hits. Maybe I can use an even steeper, logarithmic shape. And I can get something like that where it's mostly loud samples with some variation. Let's maybe shoot for something in between. I used -3 and then -5. Let's try -4. Let's see what that sounds like. And again, you can go back in here. If there's any notes that you don't like, you can always change them, change their velocities from here. Let's hear that with the entire drum kit in. Yeah, and so what I like to do is I'm just kind of tucking these samples under the original recording. They don't need to be super loud. It just needs to be strong enough to sort of accent the recording that's already there and give it some more, front-end punch. What I recommend you doing at this point is going through the entire replacer track and just making sure that there's no erroneous notes. Make sure that the velocities are where you want them. Do some detailed velocity editing. And so that's what I'm going to do, and I'll be right back. Okay, so what I ended up doing is I ended up raising up the velocities quite a bit more, and I want to increase the randomization a bit as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's jump over here. Yeah, I think these are just a mistake. I think that's like an erroneous kick hit. So I'm just going to pull that out. Okay, now if you want to reuse this patch for later, so you can just load it up and all the programming is already done, what you do is you go back into your sampler instrument, go up to the preset menu up here, select Save As, and then you can give it a custom name and add it to your sample library. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'll call this Drum Samples, and then I'll call this Kick DW Collectors. I'll just say CS. It's a DW Collectors series. And then what size was that again? That was 22 by 20. So say 22 by 20. And anytime, actually I should have done one other thing there. Save as. You can include the audio data with that instrument. So we can do that. We'll go ahead and replace that. And then anytime you want to use this again, maybe you want to use it on an album for multiple songs, you just load that up right here, and all those samples will come back. All of that sample programming will come back as well. Now, one last step that I often like to do is once I get the MIDI all knocked out the way I want, what I'll often do is I'll convert this over to audio. So I'll just select that track, press Control B. This will bring up your bounce in place dialog. I'll just call this Kick Plus. We'll put this on a new track, 1 file per track, mute the original, bypass effects plugins, don't include volume, and don't normalize. And then what that's going to do is convert that MIDI region into audio. I can either hide or delete the original. To hide, I'm going to go ahead and mute it first. You press H, you'll see a little H show up on the track. Click that H and then press H on your keyboard again to hide the hidden tracks. Now, the reason why I like to convert to audio is it gives me a chance to check the alignment and the phase with the original kick track. So you can see here, we're pretty much in alignment, and each sample is going to be a little bit different because remember, they're randomized, but it looks like the samples are just like a hair behind the original. Let's kind of go over here real quick. Yeah. So that's kind of the trend here, is they're a little bit behind. So let's go ahead and pull these forward a bit. And you know what? What I might even do is I might flip the phase on the sample. But let's just like put a bit of this in a loop here. Let's just hear all three kicks together. Let's add the gain plugin to the Kick Plus track. This is under Utility. And let's flip the phase of both the left and right channels. And then without the phase invert. Hear how we're losing a little bit of the bass? That's a dead giveaway that we have a phase cancellation issue going on. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the phase on this sample. And I also showed you that you can do this down in the file editor. So if you just double click on this, go to the file editor, make sure everything is selected, go to functions, and then go to invert. We can permanently invert the phase, and we no longer have to have that gain plugin on there. So yeah, even though this kind of dips down a little bit, this one's going up, this one's going up, so we want the sample to go up as well. And yeah, you can see we have a pretty nice phase congruency here. So yeah, that's how we can do that. Let's go ahead and just give all of the drums a listen. Yeah, I think that sounds miles better than the original. It's not stuffy, but we're still using the original recording. We're not replacing the original recording. We're just augmenting and enhancing the original recording with some additional samples. Okay, so that's kick drum replacement and doubling techniques. In the next video, we're going to move on to the snare drum. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.